All right, let's jump right in. We're going to start with a question that seems, well, pretty simple. What exactly is a working day? You know, it's the time you clock in, the time you clock out. Simple, right? Well, for Karl Marx, digging into this in Chapter 10 of Capital, the answer is anything but simple. You see, in his analysis, the working day isn't just some neutral measurement of time. Not at all. It's a battlefield. It's the main arena where the fundamental conflict of the whole capitalist system actually unfolds. We're talking about a relentless struggle over our time, our energy, and ultimately, our lives.
So to really get a grip on this conflict, we've got to look at one of the main combatants first. Let's start with the logic of capital itself. What is it that actually drives it? What's its essential animating impulse? Okay, to unpack this, we need to get our heads around a really key concept Marx lays out: absolute surplus value. Think of the working day as being split into two parts. The first part is what Marx calls necessary labor time. This is the time the worker spends creating enough value to cover their own wages, to pay for their food, their rent, their basic upkeep. But the workday doesn't just stop there, does it? All the time you work after that point, that's surplus labor. And that surplus labor creates surplus value. That's the profit that goes straight to the capitalist. So logically, the most direct, most straightforward way for capital to increase its profit is, you guessed it, just make the working day longer. Stretch out that surplus labor time. That is the engine driving absolute surplus value.
And Marx uses this really powerful, almost Gothic metaphor to get this point across. And listen, he's not just being poetic here. This is for analytical precision. He says capital, the machines, the money, the raw materials, it's all dead labor. It's the result of work that's already been done. And it can only grow, it can only live by sucking living labor out of us in the present. This gives it this relentless, this vampire-like thirst for the longest working day it can possibly get.
Now, from capital's point of view, this whole drive is completely rational. It's just business. The capitalist has bought a commodity, right? That commodity is a day's worth of a worker's ability to work, their labor power. And just like if you bought any other product, you're entitled to use it. The capitalist's goal is to consume that commodity, that labor power, to its absolute fullest to get the most benefit. The big problem, as Marx points out, is that the definition of a day is, well, it's a surprisingly flexible thing.
But of course, there's another player on this battlefield, and this player has a totally opposing claim, one that's grounded in the simple material necessity of being a living person, the laborer.
And this comparison gets to the absolute heart of the workers' counterargument. See, their commodity, labor power, their ability to work, is totally unique. It's not like anything else. You use up a ton of coal, and it's gone. End of story. But labor power, that lives inside a person. And for it to keep its value, so it can be sold again, it has to be preserved. It has to be reproducible. The worker has to be able to show up tomorrow and the day after that, healthy and strong enough to work. So Marx actually gives a voice to this argument. And it's not an emotional plea, it's an argument based on the exact same rules of the market. The worker is essentially saying, look, there's a huge difference between using my labor power and destroying it. The wage you pay me for one day assumes I'll be able to come back and work the next. If you work me into the ground, you're not just using today's labor power, you're plundering tomorrow's, but you're only paying me for one. That's not use, that's plunder. So I demand a normal working day, not as some kind of gift, but because I am demanding the full value of the commodity I sold you.
So what you end up with is this fundamental deadlock. You have two sides both making claims based on the very same rules of the market, and they are locked in a struggle over the very definition of a day's work. Marx has a specific term for this. He calls it an antinomy. It's a clash of right against right, where both sides are, in a way, correct according to the laws of commodity exchange. So, how do you solve that? When you have two equal competing rights, abstract principles aren't going to cut it. The tie has to be broken somehow. And for Marx, the answer is power. Or, as he puts it, between equal rights, force decides.
And this wasn't just some theoretical debate for him. No, Marx grounds his entire analysis in the absolutely grim reality of 19th century England. He digs through official government reports from factory inspectors, and the stories they tell, they show you the real human cost when capital's drive just runs wild. We're talking about railway workers on duty for 30 hours straight, bakers who are literally worked to death by endless night shifts, and maybe worst of all, the horrifying exploitation of children. Toddlers as young as 2 years old being forced to work.
Just think about that. In some of these industries, the working day was stretched to 16, 17, even 18 hours. And this wasn't some kind of rare abuse. It was the logical outcome of a system where the only thing that determined the length of the working day was a raw contest of strength.
a fight that an individual worker, on their own, had absolutely no chance of winning.
Which brings us to the really crucial question, doesn't it? If capital's inherent drive is towards a limitless working day, why do we now have legally defined limits? Why does our day have a set number of hours at all? And this is really the core thesis of this entire chapter. The normal working day that we take for granted, it's not natural. It didn't just happen. It's a social and political creation. It's a prize that was won. And Marx describes how it was won through what he calls a protracted, more or less concealed, civil war between the capitalist class and the working class.
And he's not exaggerating when he calls it a war. It was a long, hard-fought campaign, not some single decisive battle. You can see it right here in this timeline of English factory laws. It's a slow, step-by-step process. First, they managed to get limits on the very worst exploitation, child labor. Then it expanded to women and young people. The 10 Hours Bill in 1847, that was a huge breakthrough. For the first time ever, the state stepped in and put a hard limit on the working day in a major industry. It basically turned the victory of that long struggle into law. This was the force that finally decided the issue.
So what Marx's analysis really does is give us a new lens to look at our own world. He reveals the length of the working day as the original battleground. And that leaves us with a really important question for today, for right now. What are the new frontiers in that struggle over our time? Is it the right to disconnect after hours? Is it the debate over a 4-day work week? Or maybe the way our work life bleeds into our home life thanks to our phones? His framework suggests these aren't just separate issues. They're the modern expressions of that same fundamental and still unresolved struggle over the working day.